Hi, it's Blair with Hawkeye Ordnance. Today we're going to do a little short video on populating your new ANS trigger guard. So we're doing this with an M2 fire control group. This will be the same process on the M1/M4 or Breda or the Affinity or even the Remington VersaMax. It's pretty much the same process all the way through. So to begin with, we'll need a few tools. We're going to need a little hammer, and a needle-nose pliers is kind of helpful depending on the size of your hands. We're going to need an 1/8 inch punch and then a 1/4 inch punch, or maybe even a little bit bigger, but we'll need those for setting in a couple roll pins involved with this. So to get started, we're going to take everything down from the factory assembly. So the first thing you're going to do is we're going to remove our plunger assembly. It's under spring pressure. We just pull back on it, lift it out. There's a little retaining washer here we're going to take off. We don't need that for the ANS trigger guard, so we can set it aside, but we'll keep our plunger assembly there. And then if you take a knife, we'll remove our C-clips. So there's a flat spot and then a rounded spot. Keep your thumb on the flat spot, work your knife behind it. You can just lift up and lift that off. Make sure we don't lose that. Now we'll release the hammer, and we're going to keep our thumb over the top of our hammer spring and cup here, and at the same time we're going to push down on our hammer pivot pin, slide that out. It only comes out to the right. It's got a shoulder on it. We can lift out our hammer, let off the pressure. We'll remove our hammer spring and cup, lift out our lifter assembly, lift out our cartridge drop lever. Just hooks on that spring. We'll remove that. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is our trigger pivot pin. We're going to push that out from the left to the right. There is a spring here that we want to keep our finger over so we don't lose that. Push over there. Okay. There's our trigger bar assembly. Set that aside. Again, retain that spring. Pull our trigger pivot pin out. Our cartridge drop lever spring comes out like so. Now we're going to remove our safety assembly. So the best thing to do is to set this down like so. I'm using an armorer's block. If you have a deck of cards or anything, you want to elevate it off the work surface just a little bit. We're going to take an 1/8 inch punch and we're going to drive this pin out of here. And it's going to drop free. And then we want to keep our thumb over the top of this because our safety detent spring is going to want to come out towards the top. So we remove our punch. There's our spring in there. Shake that out. That's it there. Set that aside. Now if you take an 1/8 inch punch and you push down in there, you can feel where the detent is. Just put a little side pressure and pull straight back. You should be able to remove that safety detent. You should have a little grease on the end there. If it doesn't, add a little bit on your reinstall, and we'll remove our safety. So that's all the parts we need out of the factory trigger group. So we can set that aside. Now we'll prep our ANS trigger guard. First thing we're going to do is the guard comes with two pins, two roll pins. You have a longer one and a shorter one. Okay, shorter one is for retaining your safety detent and spring. The longer one is to replace that rear pin from the factory one. So we'll get that started. With our hammer, just grab that down. Okay, we got it about flush there. We want to recess it about a 1/16 of an inch. Okay. Look at it, make sure it's not protruding on either side. Okay. So that takes care of that. We'll take our trigger bar assembly. There's a notch in the back that's going to go over that pin. Set it down in there. And we'll grab our spring for our cartridge drop lever. Loop side goes up. The little leg goes down. There's a groove here for it to ride in. We're just going to set it down in there. And then we'll take our trigger pivot pin. And we're just going to get those two to line up. Get it started until we hit the trigger bar there. And turn it around. you put a little downward pressure, and you can look through the hole here and see where everything lines up, and with just some finger pressure, you can drive that pin right where you need to be. Okay, so that's that. Now we'll install the safety. This is the part that gets to be the trickiest. So for right side safety, we'll drop our safety assembly in there. We'll take our safety detent, drop that back in the top, our detent spring, push that down. Now that detent spring is going to stand proud here. It stands up a little bit. So we'll get that set where we want it. Back on our armor's block. This is where I like to use a needle nose to get started with, but we take our little roll pin here and we're just going to get it started. Okay. Now once we're started, what we're going to do is we're going to drive this pin down right until we about get to that spring. We don't want to drive it too far because we hit the spring, we're going to deform the spring and it's not going to be any good. So drive it down a little bit till you can see. And now we're just getting the pin onto that spring. And what I'm trying to do is hook that spring behind that pin. We have just a hair more to go. A little tap. Okay, now we're starting to ride up on that spring. So we can push on that spring and hook it behind our roll pin there. Keep the thumb over top of it in case it does let loose, you don't lose it. Now we can drive this home. Take a check, make sure you're not deforming the spring. Now I'll take a little larger punch, set this pin. All right, we should be flush on either side. Our detent and spring are locked in there. We got good movement on our safety. That works just fine. So now it's just back to reassembly. So we'll take our cartridge drop lever. It's got a little dog leg here. We're going to hook that behind that spring, push it up into place. Our hammer spring and cup assembly is going to go right in behind that. Now, there's a little leg here that's going to go right over the top of this to retain it once we get our assembly put back together. But we'll get it kind of set in place a little bit here. Take our lifter assembly, slide that back on. Take our hammer pivot pin through the cartridge drop into the lifter and then into the body of the trigger guard itself and just to the opening of where our hammer is going to go. And then if you push down on top of your hammer spring with a hammer, looking through the left side, you should be able to see everything start to line up. Push our pin through. We're going to rotate down. Hook the hammer on the sear. Make sure this pin has got a shoulder on this right side. Make sure everything's just lined up nice and flush here. We don't have a lot of slop. Look on this side. Now we can see the groove on the side of this that our C-clip is going to go into. So we grab our C-clip. Just push it on. That in place. And we take our lifter plunger rod and just stick it behind the breech block there. Now, we got good rotation on everything. Everything seems to be nice and lined up. This pin should be centered on it pretty good. We don't want a lot of slop on either side. Everything rotates good. Hammer comes off the sear nicely. Safety still works. In a nutshell, that's everything right there. So, thanks again for watching. Happy shooting.